Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Shalom u'bracha. I want to welcome everyone here tonight. On behalf of my wife and myself, the rabbis of the community, the Gilbert family, for this special memorial in memory and in tribute of our dear friend, Dr. Ron Gilbert. I want to thank Elizabeth for choosing to remember Ron together with the entire community. Ron was a person who cared sincerely, first and foremost, for his family, friends, community, patients, colleagues. He was the president of our congregation, and he was a source of inspiration to all of us, and he continues to be so. Ron worked very hard to live up to the highest standards, and achieved greatly in his own personal spiritual growth. And it is therefore fitting, and again I thank Elizabeth especially for choosing to do this memorial in a way of having a Torah lecture which talks about the Jewish values that were so dear to Ron. In the parsha last week, we had an incident where the Jewish people crossed the Red Sea and they had a tough time. They came to a place and there was no water. There was water, but it was very bitter and they couldn't drink it. And they had a problem. When you're thirsty and you can't drink the water, life becomes miserable. And they complained. And God showed Moses an eitz, a tree, and he told him to cast it into the water, and the water will become drinkable. Indeed, Moshe did that. The water became sweet, and people drank from the water. Commentaries tell us water is the source of life, and as we go through life, sometimes the situation becomes unbearable. We face difficulties, tragedies, things that we can't cope with. And we wonder how we are going to survive. So God chose Moses the Eitz Chaim. What is the Eitz Chaim? Eitz Chaim is the Torah, which is the tree of life. And he tells them that through the teachings of the Torah, not everything in life turns around instantly, but at least the Torah and its values give us a way, in spite of the difficulty, to be able to deal with the situation. And eventually, those bitter waters actually become a source of nourishment and maintain and vitalize the Jewish people. And therefore, tonight, we will be remembering Ron the Jewish way, the way he wanted to be remembered. I want to also thank Rabbi YY, who worked very hard to make sure that this event unfolds in the beautiful way that it did, all the arrangements and so on. And of course, last but not least, I want to, as the rabbi of the community, bless Elizabeth, Stefan, Jakey, the friends, that God, the year went by, the Yahrzeit is Shabbos, but I would venture to say the pain didn't go away. And God should comfort Elizabeth, wonderful children, and the community and the friends, and the future should be a bright one. Yes, sometimes it's hard to see how that's possible, but it should be a bright one, as only God can make. And you should be blessed. Ach, tov v'chesed, only goodness and kindness. At this point, it's my honor and privilege to call up Elizabeth to share a few words. Yes, and very importantly, if you have cell phones, kindly turn them off. Okay, so that, okay, we don't need to explain that.
You must be wondering how I managed this very difficult and sad year. I don't know, but I will tell you that I medicate myself with some powerful meds. After all, I was married to a doctor for 24 years. The first medication I take is faith. A huge dose of faith every single day. I have always had faith. Actually, it's easy to have faith when life is good. And thank God, most of my life I have been so blessed. But then, when tragedy strikes and happiness vanishes away, then faith stares at you in the eye and asks, "You still with me?" The answer is yes. I still have faith, and now more than ever. A big part of my continuous faith is due to Ron. As you may remember, in his letter to the boys, he stressed the importance of having God in one's life and to live an ethical life, because having God in one's life in spite of unfortunate times. So he stressed the importance of having God in one's life in spite of the unfortunate times, noting that religion demands of one to live an ethical life and prevents one from rationalizing the decisions one makes. His parting words resonate with me and inspire me to continue to have faith. The second meditation I take is gratitude. I'm grateful to God for giving me the strength to get up every morning and continue living my life despite the challenges I face, while also being able to partake in some joyous occasions, such as weddings or mitzvahs, and the birth of a new member in my family. I'm grateful to my 2 boys who give me unconditional love in spite of all the errors of my new role as an only parent, where before, Ron was the one that always helped them make decisions and gave them guidance. I was just there to make sure they were fed and warm and that they wore the right clothes. But now, thanks to Ron's role model and the help of so many friends and family and spiritual leaders, and the boys' love and patience, we're getting by one day at a time. I'm grateful to so many people. I was going to list all of you, but there was a couple problems with that. Number 1, we'll be here all night. And number 2, Stefan thought it sounded like a bar mitzvah speech. Thank you, Grandma. Thank you, Grandpa. So, anyway, I'm sorry. Remember the dream team, the American basketball team for the Olympics of Barcelona in '92? With Michael Jordan, Magic, Larry Bird, Charles Barkley? Well, I hate to tell you, but my dream team is bigger, wiser, okay, maybe not taller, but definitely stronger and for sure cheaper. Actually, for free. Ron's outstanding brothers and their wives, my family in Argentina, my amazing friends, even friends of friends, entire communities here and far, everyone stepped up to the plate, took on jobs and responsibility, all working around the clock, synchronizing among themselves, all in shock and in agony, in pain, still showed up bright and early the first week, the first month, and constantly ever since to help a lost friend, his widow, and his children. just because they felt it was the right thing to do, and they tell me it feels good to help. This is a true act of kindness, because you know for certain that the debt cannot pay you back. And you do it anyway. You all genuinely, lovingly help so much with difficult situations, and because my family is so far away, you all treated me and my boys like family, putting my sons and I on top of your priority list. You made us laugh and forget our sorrow, if only for a moment, during the times we miss Ron the most, like the high holidays, the Jewish holidays and festivals, helping us fill the void with laughter instead of tears, in sweetness instead of bitterness. You nurtured the deepest of our souls with your love and your attention. And some became best friends among themselves, people they had never met before. All felt they had a common feeling of loss and need to grieve together. Friends of friends, communities, institutions, all mobilized with open arms, broken hearts, and giving souls, nurturing our bodies and our souls. I'm grateful to those of you who took on mitzvahs in his memory, a donation to charity, a Torah class started here, a lesson learned there, a family dispute put to rest, peace in the home, Shabbat dinners with family and friends, with Ron as an inspiration. Everyone tried in their own way to be more like Ron and to bring light out of this darkness. And all of you who just with a simple smile, a warm hug, a wordless feeling of love and care had given me strength and comfort. Last but not least, my deepest gratitude to each and every one of you who so generously contributed to this memorial fund and helped making these lectures with the most eminent rabbis possible, Rabbi Mansur and Rabbi Jacobson, Ron's most favorite rabbis. He'd always listen to their tapes and learn from their inspirations and their amazing insights on his drive to and from work. And even when he had 5 minutes of lunch break, he would close the doors to his office and listen to their tapes. Ron never had the opportunity to meet them in person, so for us to have them with us tonight, I'm extremely grateful. For that and so much more, your generosity, your willingness to help in any way possible, your respect for Ron and what was important to him, thank you. And Rabbi Struley, thank you for making it happen. I also must thank Rabbi Berkowitz, because one of the best things I ever did was to take a class on marriage with Rabbi Berkowitz a few months before this tragedy happened. I should have taken it 25 years earlier, but better late than never. There I learned how beautiful the marriage really is and how your spouse actually comes before anything and anyone, including your children. That course opened up my eyes and made me let go of my stubbornness a little and showed Ron, who always knew that I loved him and that I didn't take it for granted. I just started to show him a little more respect. And our relationship just blossomed. And for the last few months of our lives together, we were in harmony, in peace, and in love. Now, I just want to ask you, all of you, to give your marriage all you got. Don't waste time in silly fights. It's not worth it. I'll give anything to have Ron back and have that marriage again. I'm extremely grateful to Ron for giving me the honor to be his wife and the mother of his children, for loving us with all his heart and giving us all of him, and for all the life lessons he taught us by leading a meeting for life. Ron influenced all of us so much. He sacrificed his own time and energy for a lot of us in this room. People would constantly contact him in person, in writing, from around the world. He always gave the most of himself, expecting nothing in return, and regardless of social status or class. The more we appreciate Ron's greatness, the more we want to emulate him. We appreciate his wisdom, his depth of understanding, his greatness of character, his kindness and compassion. I have to tell you, I saw it with my own eyes. Ron always, consistently and continuously, worked on correcting his character. Even when I told him I loved him the way he was, because I wanted him to love me for who I was, he still worked at it day after day, perfecting himself as a doctor, as a friend, as a husband, as a father, and as a Jew. Always with discipline, integrity, and honesty. Even towards the end of his life, when there were no traces of anger left in him, he still tried to improve. Always walked away from dispute, never raised his voice, and always ran away from honor. Okay, now back to my meds. The third part of my cocktail, after faith and gratitude, is a positive attitude. I remember always preaching about it to my boys, so now I have to prove myself that I do what I say. And I do remind myself over and over and over again that my cup is still full of all the love and happiness that Ron gave me. And I also have his two clones, Stefan and Jakey, who not only look like him, think like him, and talk like him, that they also get mad at me the same way Ron did. They even use his same words. I guess I'm not off the hook. Ron still wants me to improve myself. And the good news is that Jakey the other day did acknowledge that I was getting better, but that was before I got worse. Anyway. Now, why do I keep a positive attitude, notwithstanding the pain I have endured? Yes, I miss Ron so much, but I feel his presence. He's still with me. I carry him wherever I go. He gives me the strength to move forward in spite of this acute pain, and he inspires me to do good, to help a friend, to smile to a stranger, to answer nicely to my most loved ones, the most difficult thing, just like he did, to not give up, to always try my best. Let actions speak louder than words, to ask for help and advice. The list goes on and on everything that I learned from him in our years together. They resonate in my head all the time. Now, the last and powerful component of the medications I take is hope. I do pray and hope every day that my boys see happiness again, and that they become the amazing, loving fathers and husbands that their dad was. The other day, I got a call from the mother of a couple of boys with disabilities that Jakey mentors as part of the High Life program in LA. She called me to tell me that she was watching Jakey play with her kids, and she could see how caring and how loving he was to the kids. And she said, "Your husband must have spent a lot of time with the kids." I said, "Not really. Ron was a busy man, but he did spend quality time with his boys, and he taught them to be mentors, just like him." The Rebbe says, the ties between two people, especially husband and wife, and father and child, are primarily spiritual. That means that a bullet can affect the body, but not the soul. The physical bond can be broken by a bullet, but not the spiritual relationship. Ron's soul remains in contact with us, his most beloved. He knows what happens here. Our grief is his grief. Our joy is his joy. And if we have strength to keep living with a meaningful life, we give him this very special experience of happiness. My hope is to always bring him happiness and to elevate his soul through our good deeds higher and higher in Gan Eden. I said it before, and I'll say it again. I'm not a lonely bird on the roof, vulnerable and scared. I'm surrounded by a large flock of birds, all of you in this room, flying around me, keeping me safe and strong. And instead of focusing on how miserable my life without Ron is, I focus on how blessed I am to have all of you in my life. I will forever be grateful for generations and generations for your outpouring of love and solidarity. So there you have it. I self-medicate with faith and gratitude, a positive attitude and hope, and yes, sometimes a shot of tequila. Thank you all for being here tonight to honor Ron.
evening, ladies and gentlemen. The topic today is finding your mission in life, lessons from a life well lived. And I feel that's suitable because Ron lived his life with a sense of mission. A mission to give, to share, to inspire, to heal. Whether as a friend, a doctor, a community member, somebody you randomly met, you always felt something different about him. And it was that sense of mission that he always carried with himself, and that always drove him to become that better person. I miss Ron, we all miss Ron. Yet we look around this room and this is Ron. God bringing together so many people, so many different types of people, in this common connection and this common feeling of who we know Ron to be. It's only a super mensch that can do something like this. Our speaker tonight, Rabbi YY Jacobson, is definitely one of the most sought after speakers in the Jewish world today. He has lectured to Jewish and non-Jewish audiences on 6 continents and in 40 states. Recently came back from Ukraine and Irvine. And he serves as a teacher and mentor to thousands across the globe. Rabbi Jacobson is the dean of the yeshiva.net, teaching via the web one of the largest Torah classes in the world today, with thousands of students globally. He is the first rabbi to have given the keynote address to the U.S. military chaplains and to the 34,000 employees of the National Security Agency. He also serves as a columnist in the largest Yiddish English newspaper existing today, the Allgemeiner Journal. It's my true pleasure to introduce to you Rabbi YY Jacobson.
In 1967, Ariel Sharon, who passed on this Shabbos afternoon in Israel after a stroke a number of years ago, serving as Prime Minister of Israel. But in '67, he was one of the commanders who led the remarkable victory of a small state being attacked by 7 hostile armies, vowing another Auschwitz. And in 6 days, not only was victory achieved, but Israel was literally quadrupled. Arik Sharon was one of the symbols of that victory. And yet, it was only a few weeks after this stunning, miraculous triumph when he and his late wife Lili were in their home and they suddenly heard a shot, and Arik Sharon ran into the room and he saw his 9-year-old son, Gur was his name, who was playing with one of his father's guns, and by mistake pulled the trigger and shot himself. And he caught his child, who died in his own arms. The Rebbe, the Lubavitcher Rebbe of blessed memory, penned a letter to Ariel Sharon. I saw the letter, it's been published. And in the letter he wrote to him, he said, I don't know you personally, but I wanted to write to you. And after offering profound condolences over the horrific loss, especially coming from such a high, from such a celebration, from such a victory, he offered the traditional blessings and prayers that we offer during the Shiva and during the subsequent months when we lose a loved one. Hamakoim Yinachem Etchem B'toch Sha'ar Avei Tzion V'Yerushalayim. May God comfort you among the mourners of Zion and Jerusalem. And he asked the question, why, when we're trying to comfort somebody for an individual loss of a loved one, are we mentioning the mourners of Tzion and Yerushalayim? Jews over generations who mourned and mourned the destruction of Zion and Jerusalem. What's the connection? I come into a Shiva house and I want to offer condolences to somebody who lost a husband, a father, a brother. May God comfort you. Why among the mourners of Zion and Jerusalem? And the Lubavitcher Rebbe wrote to Ariel Sharon, Alav HaShalom, that there were three messages at least contained in this parallel. Number one, the mourning, the grief for the destruction of Tzion and Yerushalayim was not shared by Jews who lived in Jerusalem. It was not shared even by Jews who lived in the Holy Land. The grief over the destruction of Tzion and Yerushalayim was and is shared by every single Jew in the entire world throughout all of Jewish history. 60 times a day, Jews mention Yerushalayim, approximately 60 times a day. Whether it's a Jew living in New Zealand, in Australia, or a Jew living in South America, North America, or Jews living in Uzbekistan or in South Africa, the grief for Tzion and Yerushalayim, the pain for Zion and Jerusalem and its tears is shared by all of Klal Yisrael. So when we come into a family and we say, may God comfort you among the mourners of Zion and Jerusalem, we're saying, number one, you should know that your grief, your loss is not just an individual grief and loss of your own family, of your own life. But any Jew who appreciates and is sensitive to the fact that we are all limbs of one organism, that we are all members of one family, that we're all part of one soul, understands that your grief, the loss of an individual Jew, any Jew, is shared not only by immediate family, not only by distant family, not only by friends and community, but by every single Jew the world over, consciously or unconsciously. Some are more aware, some are less aware. It depends how sensitive they are to that essential unity of the Jewish people, but it's a grief shared by all of the Jewish people. Number two, we mourn for Zion and Jerusalem for its physical destruction. But nobody ever thought that the memory of Jerusalem will ever fade away. The physical city of Jerusalem was decimated. The Bet HaMikdash, the temple, was burnt. But the imagery, the energy, the presence, the memories, the laws, the customs, the traditions live on in Jewish prayer, in Jewish life, in Jewish study halls the world over. The soul of Jerusalem, did not die with the physical destruction of Jerusalem. And so we tell the mourner, God comfort you among the mourners of Zion and Jerusalem, that although the physical life has ended, as Elizabeth just mentioned, the memory, the spiritual presence, the soul, the spirit, the energy of the one who parted lives on in a very real way in our minds, in our imaginations, in our lives. And point number 3, he said, we know that Zion and Jerusalem will be rebuilt. And we pray for its rebuilding every day. And so we mention to the person who suffered the loss, God shall comfort you among the mourners of Zion and Jerusalem, in the sense that here too, the soul will be, when Mashiach comes with the resurrection, the soul will come back, just like Jerusalem will be rebuilt, the Beis HaMikdash, the third temple will be rebuilt. And so, as the Jewish world just pays tribute to the parting of Arik Sharon, I thought about this letter, and I begin my words tonight turning to the family of Ron, to his wife Elizabeth, to the 2 boys that are here, Stefan and Jakey, to the whole family and all the friends, relatives, close friends, distant friends, community members, with the words of Hamakayim Yenachem Eschem, B'soich Sha'ar Avelei Tzion v'Yerushalayim. May God comfort you of this great, terrible, devastating, horrific and brutal and really surreal and incomprehensible loss. Among the mourners of Zion and Jerusalem, remembering that although your grief is yours alone and no one will ever understand it or share it, some of it is shared by everyone in this room, and some of it is even shared by every Jew. And to know that even though one's body is gone as a result of a senseless act of horrific evil, his soul and his presence is not, and will live on in your lives and in many other lives. And that just as Zion and Jerusalem will be rebuilt, he too one day will be reunited with you. And may that be speedily in our days, with the coming of Mashiach Tzidkenu, the Karav Mamish. You know, my dear friends, there are 3 names in Hebrew for a cemetery. In English, we have 1 name, and it's more than enough. It's called a cemetery. But in Hebrew, things must be complicated. So we have 3 names, as though we don't get it once. The first name is Bet HaKvarot. We all know that name. The second name is Bet Olam, or Bet Almin. The third name is Beis HaChaim. The first means a home of burial. The second, a home of eternity. The third, a home of life. I ask you, my dear friends, why 3 names? The answer, the 3 names describe 3 different ways of describing death. And the reason there are 3 ways of describing death is because there are 3 ways of describing life. Because somebody dies in the same way somebody lives. And we view their death in the way they viewed their own lives. There are people who define their life exclusively in terms of a material, physical, biological reality. They're walking and breathing and moving around, eating, drinking, sleeping, playing some golf, etc. And sadly, tragically, when their time comes, that body is dead, it's a corpse, it's lifeless, and the cemetery is a Bet HaKvarot. It's a home of burial. It's a home in which we honor a life that was hopefully well enjoyed, and this is the place where the body is buried and interred, Bet HaKvarot. But there's a second life. There's a person whose life is not only defined by their biological existence, but they see in life also a spiritual story. They look at life and they search for the meaning of life. for the narrative of life, for the purpose of life, and they pursue that purpose. They acknowledge that a person is not just bones, sinews, and limbs with some electrical machine that developed, and ultimately a person is a random mistake evolving from bacteria, but that there is a soul, there is a spiritual engine, there is a divine spark in the human body, and when that person passes away, the cemetery for them is called Bet Olam. It's a home of eternity, because when you visit their resting place, you say, here lay someone who lives on eternally, because the soul is eternal. The soul doesn't die, the soul doesn't perish. The soul, as Elizabeth said very beautifully, cannot be cut down by a bullet. But then there's a third type of person. There's a person who not only dedicates their life to nurture their body, which is important, and to nurture their soul, which is very important, or equally important, but there's also a person who dedicates their life to help other people. They impact other people with every person they meet. And they leave a powerful impact on so many people. And when they pass on, and you look at their resting place, you say, this is not a home of burial. It's not even only a home of eternity. This is a home of life. And the reason you call it a home of life is because you could look around and you could say, here are living people who were all inspired by this human being who parted. Here are living people who continue to carry in their hearts, in their minds, and in their souls sparks of his soul, of his personality, his ideals, his dreams, his laughter, his love, his joy of life, his love of family, lives on in the hearts of his children, of his spouse, of sibling, of friends, of relatives, of a community. And when you look at people's faces, you say, there is a life that continues from all the people who were inspired by his love, his kindness, his gestures, his authenticity, his concern, his honesty, his candidness, his dedication, and they carry it on in their life in this planet. This person is not only living eternally in heaven, but there's a life that continues here on earth. And I think tonight's event, more than anything, allows us to declare that in the case of Dr. Gilbert, Zichroina Levracha, blessed memory, his resting place is not only a Bet HaKvarot, a home of burial. It's not even only a Bet Olam, a home of eternity, where his precious soul lives in the bosom of its Father in heaven. But it's also a Beis HaChayim, a home of life, as he continues to live in the hearts, in the actions, and in the lives, not only of his wife and his children, but in so many countless people that he has touched across the years, through a smile, a gesture, a word, a deed, a telephone call, a visit, a joke, or a song. And through all these people, there is a Beis HaChayim, there is a home of life. And thus, the comparison to Zion and Jerusalem is far more profound, far more powerful, far more emphasized. Since Ron liked humor, he wouldn't mind if I say a little Jewish joke. If not, it would not be respectful to his memory. If it would only be serious, we won't be respecting his memory, so you'll forgive me, right? Okay. So there was once a bar mitzvah boy who came to his mother and said, Mom, I want to talk about where our family comes from. For the bar mitzvah. She says, ha ha, my grandmother, my grandfather. She starts talking about her grandparents. No, Mom. All the way back. Where did we come from? In the beginning. The beginning? In the beginning, God created heaven and earth. On the sixth day, He created Adam and Eve. Adam and Eve decided to have children. And the rest is history. Or actually her story. And then you had Abraham and Isaac and Jacob, Sarah, Rebecca, Rachel, Leah. And another few thousand years and we're here. Okay, writes it down in his notebook. Comes to Dad. Dad, tell me where we come from. Dad says it's lineage. No, all the way back. Where did it begin? Dad was an enlightened graduate of Stanford University. Dad says we have evolved. Evolved from what, Dad? Dad explains to his son the theory of evolution, Charles Darwin's Origin of Species. We have evolved from apes. How do humans evolve from apes? So Dad pontificates the great religion of evolution, how over millions and millions of years the apes have evolved into Homo sapiens, etc. But where did the apes come from? They evolved from other primates. And how did it all begin? It began with bacteria, an explosion of bacteria. Boy comes back to Mom and says, Mom, I'm really confused about this bar mitzvah speech. Mom says, what's the problem? So I wanted to talk about where we come from. But now, according to you, we come from God, Adam, Eve, Abraham, Sarah. According to Dad, we come from apes, monkeys, bacteria. Who got it right? Mom said it's really not a contradiction, son. You see, your father was talking about his side of the family. I'm talking about my side of the family. Now, I don't mean to be too cynical, but very often when you meet certain people, you wonder which side of the family are they from. But once in a while, a person comes around, and when you look at them, you say, so this is what the Bible means when it says that a human being was created in the image of God. And Ron was one of those people that when you looked at him or when you met him, you didn't need a philosophy class or a Judaism class, but you can instinctively sense that there is dignity in human existence, that there is purposefulness in human existence, that there is a majesty and a depth in human existence. A person who carried himself in a way that reflected in his very presence the awesomeness of the presence of a human being at every moment as an ambassador of God in this world, an ambassador of love, of light, of hope. They say there was once a rabbi who was studying Talmud at 3 a.m. A couple knocks on his door. He opens the door, 3 a.m, a couple? Yes, she says, a third world war just broke out in our home. The rabbi says, what happened? Couple says, we're making a bris tomorrow morning. The rabbi says, Mazel Tov, what's the war? The name. What do we name the baby? The rabbi says, what do you want the name to be? She says, I want the name to be Moshe. Rabbi turns to the husband and says, what do you want the name to be? Says, I want the name to be Moshe. So the rabbi says, so what's the fight? She says, I want Moshe after my father. And he wants Moshe after his father. Rabbi says, I have a genius idea. Why don't we name him Moshe after both fathers? She says, no way. My father was a gentleman. He was a mensch, a edelkeit, generous, giving, loving, refined, wonderful, refined human being. My father-in-law, a ganev, a shakrin, a gazlin, a reitzeach, a terrorist, a shlomazel, a nudnik, a gambler, an addict, an alcoholic, a codependent, horrible person. Never will I allow my son to be named after him. Rabbi turns to the father and says, what do you say? He says, my wife has a point, but it's my father. I want a name for my father. The rabbi says, give me a few minutes to think about this. 10 minutes later, he calls them back into his office and says, okay, here's the verdict. Tomorrow at the bris, the name of the baby shall be Moshe. Psst. Such genius. They both scream, but after whom? Rabbi says, for that we wait till the boy grows up. And then we'll see. We'll see his behavior. He will let us all know whether he was named after this Moshe or he was named after this Moshe. Ultimately, we make choices whether we're going to reflect one side of the family or whether we're going to reflect another side of the family. And tonight we pay tribute to a person who, just gazing at them, never mind conversing with them, never mind visiting them and being treated by Ron, simply, without even the need to speak about, ingrained in people's hearts, what is the meaning of being a human being? What is the meaning of being a Jew? What does it mean to be part of that nation that's defined in this week's portion, Yisro, as Mamlechet Kohanim, V'go Kadosh, a kingdom of princes and a holy nation, because he carried himself around as a member of a nation that is Mamleches Kohanim, prince-like, royal-like, and sacred, holy, where every human being is treated with sacredness, and where every moment is treated with a certain majesty. There's a scene that is certainly a very haunting scene in the Hebrew Bible, in the Torah. And it speaks a lot to tonight's event. It's that first moment when Moshe, gets to see God. And he sees him not like anybody else. He sees him in a burning bush. And the bush is not being consumed, but it's on fire. And Moses approaches the bush and he says, in the beginning of the book of Exodus, Asurana va'ere es hamara hagadol hazeh. Madua lo yivarasna. Let me come close and understand why this bush doesn't get consumed by fire. And suddenly he hears a voice. Moshe, Moshe, shalna alecha me'al raglecha. Remove your shoes off your feet because you're standing on holy soil. And Moshe takes his shoes off his feet because you're standing on sacred soil. And then God speaks to him from the burning bush and says, I am the God of your father, the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. And at this point, Vayaster Moshe Ponav, Ki Yori Mehabet Elokim, Moses hides his face. He doesn't want to look at the bush anymore because he's afraid to gaze at God. What was the meaning of that experience? God revealed himself to Adam and Noah and Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob and so many other prophets. But this was a unique type of revelation. What was the nature of this? What was the symbolism of this? And one of the explanations speaks volumes about an evening like this. Moses, the first leader who was about to rescue a nation oppressed in Egypt, sees a burning bush and it doesn't get consumed. He didn't only see a tree that was on fire. He was looking at the history of his people. And he saw a nation that time and time again would be destined to destruction, to all forms of persecution, genocide, and deaths. He saw every tragedy communally and individually that would occur subsequently in the long and painful millennia of Jewish history. And Moses wants to understand, what is the nature of this story? They burn and yet they're not consumed. And God tells Moses, the first thing, take your shoes off your feet, because you're standing on holy soil. What God is telling Moses is, whenever you're standing in the presence of a person who endured pain, Take your shoes off your feet, because you're standing in the presence of holiness. A person who has experienced pain is in a different plateau. They see life differently. They see death differently. They see love differently. Nothing is ever the same. Somebody who never experienced it will just not understand. They may want to. They may try to empathize, but they just won't get it. Take your shoes off your feet and be humble. Don't become a philosopher in the presence of pain. Don't become a theologian. Don't become an expert. Don't become a rationalizer. Don't become somebody who can explain to us the secrets of the universe. Take your shoes off your feet and stand in humble awe and silence in the presence of the mystery of pain. That Moses does. And then God offers Moses an offer that nobody else was ever given in history. Hashem turns to Moshe and says, look at this bush. I am the God of your father, the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. And Moses hides his face. What happened? You just wanted to see the bush. Why are you hiding your face? What God was telling Moses is, I will show you that I am in the fire. I will show you how I am in the pain. I will show you that I never left. If you look, I will reveal to you the secret of suffering. I will explain to you the mystery that defies every human mind. Why? Why such cruelty? Why such injustice? Why should a 52-year-old man's wonderful life be cut down so short due to a senseless, horrific crime? Why? And you know what Moses says to God? I'm not going to look. He hides his face. He doesn't want to look. Why not? The answer is because Moses knows that the moment he looks, he will never be able to truly empathize with his people the way a leader needs to empathize with his people. Because there are two types of pain in this world, my friends. There are pains in this world that are easier to deal with because we see clearly their benefits. So many things in life are a little painful, a lot painful. Taking out that splinter from your child's finger may cause pain, but nonetheless it's a pain that everyone deals with because we understand the benefits of avoiding infections. Dr. Ron would explain to you very well how people are ready to go through painful surgeries and medical procedures because we clearly know the benefits. Health that will be gained from it. Life that will be prolonged. Those are the pains that we can wrap our brains around because we can show and demonstrate the benefit, the ramifications. But then there are pains in the world that we look at them and we say, what's the purpose? What's the benefit? What's the use? Who will gain anything from this? And these are the pains that shock us, devastate us, overwhelm us. When we first read the news, or heard the news, or was shared that news 1 year ago, last year in January, about this terrible, terrible loss, we're struck with silence. How? Why? For what? For what purpose? What's the benefit? And all there's left is silence and tears and grief. And Moses knows that if he accepts God's offer to understand the mystery of pain, he will never be able to embrace the weeping Jew in Egypt and say, come, let me cry together with you. Because if you understand the benefit, it's never that painful. So Moses tells God, thank you, but no thank you. At that moment, you see a leader. A leader is the person who refused God for the sake of his people. And when God saw that, he says, you're the man. I'm going to choose to liberate the people of Israel. And that's why at the end of that same portion, when the exile in Egypt becomes stronger, Moses screams out, Lama harayota laham hazeh. Why are you causing so much evil to these people? The only reason he can scream out is because he refused to gaze at the burning bush. He refused to understand, to wrap his brain, because he wanted to remain loyal to his people. He wanted to be able to be there with them and cry with them. And here tonight, we all know, if Moses didn't look, he had the chance to look. We weren't given the chance to look. We certainly can't look. All we do is say, we will never know your pain. We will never fully understand your pain. We will never fully appreciate your pain. But we want to be here with you. We want to give you our shoulders to cry on, and our hearts to embrace you, and tell you that our souls and our minds are with you at this night and at this time of the first Yahrzeit, of a great neshama, of a great spirit, of an extraordinary giant of a human being, a doctor, a Jew, and really a malach, an angel who lifted up the world, who enriched his world during his 52 short years, but each one filled with endless dignity and endless meaning. When I think of Ron, I'm reminded of that story I once read about a fire. And a fireman comes into the building to save the people, and he sees a disabled person. And he picks him up and schleps him out of the burning house, puts him in a wheelchair and carries him away. And on the way out to safety, the man who was just saved turns to this fireman and he says, I owe you my life. Now name me your price and I'll give it to you. You know, God has blessed me with wealth. I'll give you whatever you want, because my money would have been worthless another few minutes had those flames consumed me. And the fireman tells him, I was just doing my job. I don't mean to be anti-Semitic, but he probably wasn't Jewish. I was just doing my job. I don't know too many friends who would say I was just doing my job. Of course I was doing my job, so what? I was just doing my job. Don't pay me. He says, don't be a fool. I'm offering you an opportunity of a lifetime. You could make your fortune. He says, I don't need money. I support my family. I support my wife and kids fine. I have what I need. It's all right. You don't have to pay me. He says, I want to reward you. He says, I'm not going to take your money. So he says, so tell me how I could reward you. He says, you want to reward me? I'll ask of you one thing. Live a life that was worth saving. And in many ways, I would say that Ron, before he retired at night, he ensured that he lived a life that was worth remembering that day, that was worth saving, that was worth living. And when we think about such a life, when we think about what type of life we could live, we should live, about our life's mission, to live a life that's worth saving, to remember that to be is to stand for something. To live is to serve. To live is to live a life that is meaningful, in which we become ambassadors of God, ambassadors of a message that invigorates, that inspires, that illuminates and lifts up every person in their field, but that when I go to sleep at night, I should be able to look in the mirror and say, it was a day worth saving. It was a day worth remembering. It was a day worth cherishing. think nobody will disagree that the 52 years of Dr. Gilbert, one can say with full conviction and without any exaggeration, it was a life worthy to the name life. Life in his Hebrew name, which was Chaim. Chaim is life. We all live, but not all of us are named. That was his Hebrew name, Chaim. But not all of us are named life. Because for some of us, we still have to figure out we're alive. There are three types of people. There are people that make things happen. There are people that watch things happen. There are people that you have to tell them that something happened. And then there are people that you have to wake them up to tell them that something happened. That's a fourth category. So there are people that are alive because they just never died. And there are people that are alive because they are synonymous with life. Ron's Hebrew Jewish name was Chaim, which means life. Because somehow he became one with his life. He lived every moment pulsated with vibrancy, with life, with the laughter of life, with the opportunities of life, with a feeling that life is a gift, that man is a messenger. The truth is, every person is a messenger, but we often forget that we're messengers, or we forget the message. And when you know you're a messenger and you don't forget your message, then you could live. There was something else about his life that we could learn from, that we could glean from. It's the power of one deed and the power of touching one person. There was a story a number of years ago. There was an Israeli soldier. His name was Yoni. His name is Yoni, stationed in Hebron, in the city of Hebron. And he was shot by an Arab terrorist in the middle of the night. A young soldier, a 20-year-old boy. He was alone. And his comrades, his friends were sleeping. And he was bleeding to death. And he would have bled to death. But there was another soldier far away who heard a gunshot. His name was Yair, and he decided to go investigate. Even though you're hearing a gunshot in Hebron, it's like, what else is new? But he went to investigate, and sure enough, he finds Yoni bleeding to death. He immediately with his hand, blocks the wound, stops the blood flow, and is literally holding his life in his hands. He calls for help. They immediately rush him to a hospital. He accompanies him in the ambulance, and when he sees that it's under control, he leaves. The parents are called to the hospital. He goes through a successful surgery. Yoni's life is saved. But Yoni doesn't know who was that soldier who called for help. The soldier didn't remain, and the parents are yearning to thank the one who saved their son, but they don't know who it is. And the army doesn't know who it is. The soldier didn't identify himself, he just went back. So what do? So what do you do? So they had a grocery store. The parents of Yoni had a grocery store in the town they lived in Israel. They decided to put a picture of their son in the grocery store, and they wrote, if anybody knows of a soldier who stopped the blood flow of this boy in Hebron and saved his life on this night, please tell us. A year passes and they don't hear from anybody. A year later, a woman comes into their grocery store to buy some food, and she sees the picture. She reads the sign. She comes over to the husband and wife who run the grocery store, and she says, this was my son, Yair. How do you know? Well, he came home a year ago for Shabbat. He had a weekend chufsha, a weekend of vacation from the army. And he told us that he had a great zchut, he had a great mitzvah, he had a great privilege. He said that he saved a soldier, Yoni, he was bleeding and he called for help. This is our Yair. And the two mothers embrace. How can I thank you? How can I thank you? How can I thank your son for literally giving us back our son, for saving his life? And as they're hugging each other, the mother of Yair, who saved Yoni, looks at her and says, "Do you recognize me?" She says, "No, I don't know you. I just met you." She says, "You don't recognize me?" "No. I used to live here. Why do you think I came to this store? I used to live here. 20 years ago, 25 years, I used to shop here. And now I came back for something. I decided, let me go into the store." She tells her the name. She starts remembering. And she says, "And now let me remind you that story. When I came in 21 years ago to this store one morning, and I looked dejected, downtrodden, melancholy, depressed, and you and your husband, who were busy in the store, stopped and looked at me and said, 'What happened to you?' And I said, 'It's a long story, but my life is cursed.' And you said, 'You know what, let's talk.' And you closed the store, and you took me to your home, and you sat me down, a young girl, a 21-year-old girl. And I told you, I'm broke financially, I'm depressed emotionally, and now I found out that I'm pregnant. And I need to do an abortion." And you and your husband sat with me for a few hours and said, "It's not a good idea. You'll get help. We'll be here for you. But the pleasure of a child is unparalleled in the world. And all the glicken of the universe, all the gifts of the world are all nice. But that experience of hugging and being hugged by your little angel, who can sometimes be a terrorist, but is still your child, not your children." Not only because of Ron, also because of you. Takes two. That pleasure will surpass everything. And you nurtured me back to a sense of wholesomeness. And as a result, I gave birth to my son, Yair. And I want you to know, you saved my son from an abortion. And 20 years later, my son came back to save your son when the bullet struck him. Ron lived his life understanding the power of every deed and of every person. What the story demonstrates is a couple helped one woman in her moment of distress. But 20 years later, it came back to them in an extraordinary way. Ron lived that way. There was no patient who was meaningless, who was insignificant. There was no patient who he didn't have time for. There was no human being who was just a schlepper, get out of my life. Whether it was through humor or sincerity, whether it was through a deed or words, but there was full presence and full kavanah, full mindfulness, understanding, appreciating the power of doing a favor to one person, of extending your heart to one individual, of embracing one human being in need, materially, psychologically, emotionally, spiritually, biologically, and physically. And thus we know that as his soul ascended on high, how many thousands of these deeds came back to him. How many thousands and thousands of these souls that have been helped or touched by him came back to him, to greet him, to welcome him, and to dance with him to his assigned place in Gan Eden, in the heavenly bosom of God Almighty, where every soul originates, and where every soul, after all of its journeys, whatever those journeys may be, returns. In our life, we ought not to underestimate the power of a deed. There was something else that we could learn from in our own lives. And for this, I want to share with you something I once read that really left a profound impression on me. And I say this because I know Ron's profound relationship with music. There was an Italian maestro, a great conductor of symphonies, one of the greatest. He died in 1957. His name was Arturo Toscanini. He was born in 1867 and died in 1957. He had a biographer who always pursued him because he was preparing for years a biography about this great conductor's life. He followed him through symphonies. He followed him on vacations. Hat hem gemacht Meshuggah, because he wanted a thorough, good biography of Toscanini's life. And one day, the biographer calls him and says, I'm in town. Can I come interview you tomorrow night for a few hours? He says, tomorrow night? No way. I have something very, very important going on in my life. A real biographer is a classic nudnik. So he says, great, may I ask you, what is it so important going on in your life? So he says, I'll tell you, but you can't come. He says, there is an orchestra, a symphony that I used to be the conductor of overseas, but I left it a few years ago. I left it some time ago. And they're having a concerto tomorrow night. And I'm going to be listening to it over shortwave radio. And I have to hear how the new conductor is doing and how my symphony is being directed. And I'm going to be sitting and listening to it. And I can't have any distractions and no interviews. The biographer says, may I come and watch? He says, if you don't say a word, I won't. You promise? I promise. If you come and remain silent and don't say a word throughout, not a word, I must listen all the time, then you're welcome. Biographer says, I promise. Tomorrow night he shows up, and over shortwave radio, Arturo Toscanini listens to this, what seemed like a magnificent symphony. It lasts for a long time. He's listening with all his mind, all his heart, all his brain power, all his soul, and the biographer is watching him experiencing this symphony from abroad. And it's gone, it's all done. The biographer turns to the great Italian maestro, and he says, that was magnificent, was it not? And the Italian maestro says, not really. He says, really, I'm not the expert, but what made that not so, what was missing? And he said, they were supposed to have 120 musicians, including 15 violinists. They ended up having only 14 violinists. And that's a problem. The biographer thought he's Meshuggah. How would he know from shortwave radio they had 14 violinists and that made a difference? He ignored him, you know. You don't argue with artists. They live in their own world, you know what I mean? If you're married to one, you know what I mean. You know, good luck. But he was curious. He was extremely curious. So the next morning, he phoned the director of that symphony. And he said, how many musicians were supposed to show up at last night's symphony? He said, 120. How many showed up? He said, well, one of the violinists didn't show up. There were only 14 violinists. He said, okay, thank you so much, bye-bye. He goes back to Toscanini and he says, I have to apologize. Last night I thought you were Meshuggah. Today, I still think you're Meshuggah, but I see you're right. So now you have to tell me, how did you know? So he says, people like you would never know, because you're part of the audience. And the audience knows, but the audience doesn't pick up some things. But when you're the director of a symphony, you know every note. And it's not just you know every note. You know every note because you created the notes. You are behind the notes, or at least you're completely one with the notes. Your heart and the notes merge into one being. And I knew that there were certain nuances of those notes, certain notes that were not played. And I immediately knew that there was a violin missing, and that's why they were not played. We often look at our lives and we don't appreciate their value because we are the audience. But for the conductor of the symphony, every single note matters. Every single note is indispensable. You remember Amadeus? Mozart conducts a symphony. Emperor Joseph II from Austria attends. He was a little tone deaf. So what does he do during Mozart's symphony? He does what Jews do in shul. It's called shluff. You know what shluff is? Sleep. Not this synagogue, but many others. And Mozart finishes the symphony. And what happens is, Emperor Joseph II tells Mozart, he says, Wolfgang Amadeus Mozart, job well done, but too many notes. And Mozart responds, nay, nay, your majesty. There was not a note too many. Which one do you suppose I cut? A true conductor, a true composer, knows that there is not a note too many. And if music is a metaphor for humanity and for the Jewish people, and it is, this is even more true when it comes to souls. Every soul, says Rabbi Shneur Zalman of Liadi, Kol Bale Hashir Yotzim Bashir V'nim Shachim Bashir, is part of a divine symphony. And there is not a note too many. Everybody plays their note, and every moment we play another note. And sometimes as the audience we say, I don't know the value of these notes, but as the conductor, every single note is noticeable. And when a note doesn't show up, when a note is missing, it's extremely palpable. When we think about our life, and we try to glean inspiration from Ron's life, his joy of life, his celebration of life, came from the awareness that every moment counts. Every day is significant. Every encounter has a sacred opportunity. And every conversation, as casual as it be, has meaning and has depth and is an opportunity for a wonderful, simple bond and relationship between people. From him one learns that when you're in the presence of your children, be present with your children. How many fathers are present with their children but simultaneously are busy texting
selling buildings, buying buildings, or more often dreaming about selling buildings and dreaming about, at least if you were selling a building as unto hate, your kids will forgive you if you give them half. But if you're dreaming about it, be with your kids. Be with life. You're here, be here. You're there, be there. This is a note. Play the note fully. If you're not playing the note fully, don't play it. But don't play the note haphazard. He wasn't haphazard. He played the note, and then he played the next note, and then he played the third note, and then he played the fourth note. And that's part of Chaim. That's part of what we call living. Friends, and this I want to tell especially all of us, but especially the two boys who are here with us and gracing us with their presence. There are two tombstones for every person who passes away. There's one physical tombstone that lay on the grave. That's a tombstone made of stone. It's engraved with words. The words don't change. And when one approaches the grave, they read the tombstone and they know some things about the person. That remains etched in the ground, pun intended. And it teaches us something about the life of the person, of course the name of the person, and a few characteristics of the person. But there's another tombstone. Another tombstone that we often don't pay attention to. And the second tombstone is far more important. It's a tombstone that may change every day. It's a tombstone that may grow every day. It's a tombstone that when you read it too, you could see who the person was. And the tombstone is the children. When you look at a person's child, you could see who his or her father was, who her or his mother was. And that tombstone is often not taken as seriously as the first tombstone. But while the first tombstone is important, but it lays somewhere in the ground in a cemetery, the second tombstone moves around and really allows the world to see who the person who passed on was. And in this case, Ron left two living souls, two living children. When one gazes at them, one can see in each one another aspect of their father's glow, of their father's shine, and of their father's soul. And I want to bless you that throughout your life, you shall be able to reflect those beautiful, loving, joyous, vibrant qualities of your father's beautiful soul, coupled with your own individual contributions and your own individual journeys. We know that no words can ever explain or describe the pain, that no words can ever rationalize the depth of the loss of having such a great father taken from you at such a young age through such horrific circumstances. All we could say is, we love you and we cherish you as we cherished your father, and we wish you the most beautiful and happy and wholesome life, together with your mother, together with Elizabeth. May you have tremendous nachas from your children for many, many long, happy and healthy years, amidst prosperity, amidst simcha. May your husband's soul continue to serve as an inspiration and as a shining glow and light to the entire community, to Jews the world over, for many, many long, happy and healthy years, until the mourners of Zion and Jerusalem will be comforted, together with you, with the coming of Mashiach. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Rabbi Jacobson. I do want to mention, as was mentioned earlier, this event was sponsored by the Ron Gilbert Memorial Fund, which came about through people like you, and we've been able to do a lot of good things with that over the past year, and we would love to continue doing things that we know Ron would be happy with, doing things that we know that would continue the greatness and the beauty of who he was. So if anybody would like to go and make a contribution towards the Ron Gilbert Memorial Fund, you can approach myself, Rabbi Berkowitz, Elizabeth, and we will be able to continue doing the things that we do. At this point, everybody's invited towards my left here. There's refreshments. We want to thank Pedut Isti for putting in all that effort and making it so beautiful. Make a bracha, make a blessing. Have in mind Chaim ben Yosef, his neshama shall have an aliyah, and he should plead by God to bring blessings to our entire community, and may we hope to be reunited very soon with the coming of Mashiach. B'mheira v'yameinu, amen.
Amen.
This is Hazel. This is very recognizable picture.